Jonathan Burr, athlete, Yale grad, and U.S. intelligence agent. It was the 50s, and the shadow of the Soviet Union hung over the free world. It was a time when the possibility of nuclear war was all too real. When his country called upon him to take on a secret and most dangerous mission, Jonathan didn't hesitate even after he found out that his secret mission would be the most daring ever undertaken by any American. His mission would take him deep into the heart of enemy territory. It would test him mentally, physically, and even spiritually. He would go toe-to-toe with his Soviet counterpart as they raced against the clock to determine the fate of the world. They were competitors, adversaries of the highest order, competing in a great and terrible game. This is Military Matters. This episode of Military Matters is brought to you by Navy Federal Credit Union. Navy Federal puts members first by helping them save money, make money, and enjoy peace of mind and security through personalized around-the-clock service. On average, Navy Federal members earn and save $361 more per year. You can pay no fees, get low rates, and rate discounts, plus earn cash back and grow your savings. Visit NavyFederal.org for more information. Navy Federal Credit Union. Our members are the mission. I'm Rod Rodriguez.
I'm Jack Murphy.
Jack, so far this season, we've tackled a Capitol building riot, extremism in the ranks, and the death of a Special Forces soldier. So when you proposed the topic of this episode, I have to admit that I was really curious about where exactly you were going with this.
Well, it was actually a friend of mine who served in military intelligence brought it up to me. And we were out at Las Vegas one year driving around, and he mentions this book called The Terrible Game and how it has this amazing story of this guy who has to parachute into this sort of hidden lost kingdom, this fictional kingdom in Central Asia, and participate in the terrible game. And he told me that he came across an excerpt from the book in Reader's Digest. I believe back in the day, Reader's Digest published excerpts, like a serialized form of this book, which was later turned into a novel, which is Reader's Digest, by the way, segue, also has some interesting ties to the intelligence community. That's a deep cut right there. Going to have to set that one aside for right now. We're going to go back to The Terrible Game. They took the excerpts, or the author, Dan Tyler Moore, he took those parts of the book published in Reader's Digest and turned it into a full-blown novel that was published in like 1958, I believe. And I finally, after my friend told me about that book, like maybe 6-7 years later, I went and tracked down a copy of the book.
The Terrible Game was written in 1957 by Dan Tyler. It's an obscure out-of-print book that most people haven't heard of, much less read. It's about a deadly ritual of sorts conducted in a fictitious nation in Central Asia. For outsiders to gain admittance to this isolated nation, they must complete the Terrible Game, a series of deadly challenges which has only been completed a few times in history. But if you survive, you can ask a favor of the Khan. The book is a literary and military glimpse into a world just after the devastation of World War II. It's the US versus the Soviet Union, the free world versus communism. Throw in atomic howitzers, secret agents, and exotic locales, and what you have is The Terrible Game, a book with a premise Ian Fleming, creator of 007, would be proud of.
In a short obituary, I read that the author had been stationed in North Africa and Turkey, where he developed methods of clandestine communication and also intercepted Nazis trying to smuggle diamonds north to Germany. Sadly, Mr. Moore had passed away by the 1990s, but I soon came upon his son, Dan Tyler Moore III. So I went ahead and gave him a call to ask if he would be interested in an interview. You see, the author's son has carried the father's legacy of adventure as well as patriotism, as he is also the guy behind Team Wendy, which has made ballistic helmets for American soldiers fighting the war on terror. I had to learn more.
Well, my family history is pretty much entirely military. It goes back, my great-grandfather, my grandfather, and my father were all career military officers in one way or another.
That's Dan Tyler Moore III, grandson of Dan Tyler Moore II, author of The Terrible Game.
My grandfather, who I never met, He was the founder of the Fort Sill, Oklahoma School of Artillery, the artillery school, and he was Edith Roosevelt's first cousin. So he was very close to the president. Theodore Roosevelt was my godfather. There was sort of a very close family relation. And as a matter of fact, the first Dan Tyler Moore put out Teddy Roosevelt's eye in a boxing match.
Just to back up a little step. So Dan Tyler Moore the first punched out President Theodore Roosevelt's eye in a boxing match.
Yes, that's right. At the time it happened, the boxing stopped, but there was no mention of any problem with the eye. So TR was quite a guy.
Maybe it's obvious, but I'll say it anyway. TR, he's talking about Theodore Roosevelt.
My father was in the OSS during the war, which was the Office of Strategic Services. Some people call it OSS, oh so secret.
William Wild Bill Donovan was the head of the OSS during World War II. The OSS would become the precursor to the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA.
He ended up hiring my father, who was a physicist by training, and he ended up developing a way to more effectively pick up a spy off the ground using an airplane.
Dan's describing what would later be called the Fulton extraction method. You might have seen a version of this in the film The Dark Knight, when Batman and the criminal he needs to retrieve are cornered by the Chinese police. Batman sends up a balloon with a hook that a passing plane catches and whips Batman and this criminal swiftly out of the skyscraper and into the air.
The trick was, how do you play out the line hard enough so they don't bounce, and soft enough so you don't pull the head off? So yeah, that was one of his early assignments. And then he went into the Middle East and became involved with stopping the diamond trade and involved with counterintelligence.
Diamond smugglers would travel on foot all the way from South Africa. The Nazis were interested in diamonds, but not for the reasons that you might think. I didn't know this either, but Dan explains.
The reason that the diamonds were so important is they were used to dress grinding wheels for the Third Reich, for machining crankshafts and that sort of thing.
So what happened to the folks caught smuggling diamonds?
Well, the unfortunate part about it was catching people, having agents that caught people and they'd kill them. I mean, so it wasn't, being a diamond courier was a dangerous profession, and they wanted to make it more dangerous.
As if stopping Nazi diamond trafficking weren't hazardous enough.
Well, Dad's job in South Africa was obviously to fight Nazis. But before the battle, the El Alamein battle, where Rommel was defeated in the desert, the Nazis and the Americans were in Cairo together, and they would each be putting trophies out for people to kill. Dad had his driver would spend the night in the car, and then he had to drive the car around the block before Dad would get in the car. So there was a lot of shooting going on, and it was a dangerous place to be.
30 years ago, Dan hired a secretary to help his father record his experiences and stories from his time in the OSS. Today, those stories rest in two big binders that document the unique experiences Dan Tyler Moore II had in the war. Now, I consider myself a student of espionage and special operations missions, but what Dan describes next, a story from one of those binders, is something I'd never heard of before.
One of the most interesting ones was how you would deal with the Germans stopping their industrial power. And there was a guy, his name was, I think it was Goldberg, who became Labor Secretary of the United States after the war.
Dan's referring to author Joseph Goldberg, who would serve as the U.S. Secretary of Labor from 1965 to 1968. But during World War II, he was a U.S. Army captain and OSS agent who helped organize European resistance to Nazi Germany.
He was in Germany and working directly on the problem. When they wanted to stop a train, they wanted to stop it inside a tunnel. So they wanted to really screw things up. You blow up the train in the tunnel.
There's a whole art to train derailment, specifically when it comes to rail sabotage. There is an art and a science to that. It's not quite as obvious as you might think. So what you want to do is actually derail the train. You don't want to just blow up the line. You want to blow it up just as the train's coming so that it goes off the rail. The train flips over on its end, destroys all kinds of products and hurts people and does logistical damage. You want the whole deal. You want the whole train. You want that 80-car train to be destroyed, not just the rail.
What's the whole point of stopping a train in a tunnel?
The reason why you would want to derail and destroy a train inside a tunnel is because it's that much harder to clean it up and get it out of there. Now, if you're lucky, you're also going to collapse the tunnel down on top of the train with the explosives. So you're not just destroying the rail line, you're not just destroying the entire train, but you're actually collapsing the tunnel. You're actually creating a huge disaster inside a tunnel that is going to take a significant amount of time to clear the train, to clear the rubble, to rebuild the line.
And so they had a device. The sun could go down gradually and come up gradually. But if it went off suddenly, the bomb went off.
If you put the device on top of the train days before, the device has to understand that gradual decrease in sunlight or increase at dawn and dusk versus the complete total blackout as it goes into the tunnel. When we return from the break, we find out that the similarities between Dan's lineage and the James Bond 007 character have even more in common. When we return.
If you're an active duty service member, veteran, DoD civilian, or military family member, you can join Navy Federal. That means if you served in any branch of the military, doesn't have to just be the Navy, could be the Army, Marine Corps, Air Force, or Coast Guard, you can join the Navy Federal Credit Union. On average, Navy Federal members earn and save $361 more per year. You could pay no fees, get low rates and rate discounts, plus earn cash back and grow your savings. Navy Federal puts members first by helping them save money, make money, and enjoy peace of mind and security through personalized around-the-clock service. Plus, now is a great time to join. Have a large credit card balance after the holidays? Let Navy Federal Credit Union help you rebalance your priorities. Make a plan to do away with high-interest credit card debt by transferring your balance to a Navy Federal credit card. With a low intro APR and no balance transfer fees, you can pick the right card to help you take back control. Visit NavyFederal.org. Navy Federal Credit Union. Our members are the mission. And now the fine print. Insured by NCUA, dollar value of Navy Federal's 2019 member give back study. 5.99 to 18% variable APRs based on product type and credit worthiness, up to $1 cash advance transaction fee at non-Navy Federal ATMs.
The world of U.S. Special Forces is one that is deeply entrenched in tradition and history. Today, video games and movies depict Special Forces operations as Hollywood-esque endeavors by men in fancy tactical gear shooting bad guys, and that's about it. But the history of Special Forces goes back to men who were fighting different kinds of war, and they didn't have the luxury of all that fancy high-tech gear. They relied a lot of times on wit, grit, and a little ingenuity. Dan's childhood was full of little bits of that ingenuity lying all around his home.
We saw a lot of the stuff was lying around the house. One of them was a piece of coal that was an explosive. So you throw the piece of coal behind the locomotive where they stored the coal, and eventually the guy would throw the coal in and explode the engine.
That technique was used by U.S. Special Forces in Berlin during the Cold War, who were acting as stay-behind teams. And if the Soviets ever pushed across the Berlin Wall and invaded Western Europe, the Special Forces teams would activate and conduct acts of sabotage. And one of them was exactly that old coal explosive technique. Dan's father was living in the same city as the enemy he was fighting. Sometimes the enemy would play nice, and other times they wouldn't. Some of the stories that Dan's father would recount in those binders was hard to talk about. Any combat veteran today can relate to that apprehension to share the darker sides of war.
I remember one time he was watching some people playing football, playing soccer, and as he took a closer look, they were playing soccer with someone's head. This was rather disquieting for him, and then this guy comes up to him and said, if you don't give me your wallet, I'm going to tell this mob that you're a Jew. And it was sort of hard to accept that. It was suddenly, and so he was able to talk the guy out of it by pulling out a .45. it's a difficult time when you're living in a city with the enemy, and you're all, you're trying to play nice, but you're not playing nice.
Dan has pursued his own adventures, motorbiking from Cape Town to Cairo and Turkey to China. Despite those international adventures, it would be the tragic death of his daughter Wendy that would connect his family's name and legacy once again to the fighting men and women in uniform.
But I think one of the big things I've been interested in is head injury. The Army has done a tremendous amount in head injury, and we've helped them. We started when my daughter had her fatal ski accident. We started a helmet company called Team Wendy.
That's right. He's the inventor of the Wendy helmet. You might not recognize the name, but you'd recognize it as looking very similar to the Future Assault Shell Technology or FAST helmet worn by Special Operations. Wendy helmets have been lauded for their protection, endurance, and are worn by operators all over the world. They also make a variety of helmets for keeping athletes, law enforcement, and first responders safe. But they also just look really cool.
The object was to develop a helmet that was sexy looking and it was terrific in terms of absorbing impact. And we did that. It wasn't very sexy looking. It wasn't very stylish, but we had some really interesting technology in it, and the military picked it up. And for years now, ever since that time, inside of all American helmets, all American combat helmets have been using Team Wendy energy-absorbing material. And the unique thing about this material is the faster you hit it, the harder it is. So it's sort of a viscoelastic type of material, which we have a patent on. And I ended up selling the company, but it's been a tremendous project for me that I've had an enormous amount of fun doing. How do you protect a soldier from a bullet, from a blast, and from impact? Using one helmet. And it's probably not often understood, but a football helmet has 4 times as much cushion material in it as a combat helmet. You can't fight a war with a football helmet on. It's just too big and too bulky. So you've got to optimize a lot of things to get it right.
Just a quick note here that I thought was interesting. Dan's grandfather goes and knocks out President Theodore Roosevelt in a boxing match. That same president would be the driving force behind the modernization of football, due in part to a Washington Post article published in 1905, calling for an end to the brutality of football, which that year had already claimed 15 lives.
So I like to think of what I've done in the area of helmets and head injury, sort of parlaying on to what TR started, in a modest way, of course.
Last year, I wrote a story for ConnectingVets.com about what I referred to as the broken culture of explosive breaching. That's the use of explosive charges to breach doors, walls, and other obstacles. In that article, I was very critical about the current tactics being used and talked about that lead to TBIs being endured by our service members, who are often right up on top of these explosions. For perspective, consider one of the practices to quote-unquote reduce the blast concussion is to hold up a blanket, a ballistic blanket, to stop an explosive blast 5 feet in front of you. Dan has his own perspectives on this issue with breachers.
So if you look at a breacher and a football player, they've both been subjected to subconcussive blasts. One getting hit on the head every time the ball's hiked, and the other getting a subconcussive minor injury to the head every time it happens. And so the quick solution there is when you have breachers, they should wear special stuff, and they probably shouldn't do it all the time. There should be a rotation, and there should probably be a way of do it in training less frequently.
With Team Wendy sold, Dan's next new mission has been to crack the code on traumatic brain injuries and see how he can help American service members and anyone else afflicted with this horrible injury.
And our new mission is now to develop a drug that will reduce the severity of a concussion. And if you think about this for a minute, virtually every illness that you can think of has a drug solution of some sort. A TBI, a traumatic brain injury, is not unlike a sickness. And I'm feeling very strongly that we can develop a drug that will reduce the severity of a concussion and thereby be of tremendous benefit to our fighting soldiers who unfortunately have to run into overpressure situations constantly. So we're very excited about that.
We're going to bring this whole story around full circle with The Terrible Game. We opened the show with the premise of the book, and I hope that after hearing about the incredible life of Dan Tyler II, you begin to understand that far-off exotic lands and fights to the death with communists weren't as outlandish a plot as it may have seemed at first. But perhaps even more interesting is that the protagonist of the story, the character Jonathan Burr, is only 19 years old. His fictional father is an American colonel with deep ties to the president and the world of espionage. I was curious if Dan Tyler II had written himself and his son into The Terrible Game.
Yeah, and I'm definitely in it as well.
Call me anachronistic, call me a boomer even, but I love finding obscure books that are pertinent to my interests. They can be fiction or nonfiction, work-related or not. These are those hidden gems that you only find about through word of mouth. Two of the best novels I've ever read about the Vietnam War are Tiger the Lerp Dog by Ken Miller and Parthian Shot by Lloyd Little, a Ranger and a Green Beret veteran respectively. But you would never hear about these books unless you sit down for a cold beer with one of the old salts at a Special Forces Association event. The same goes for A Mission for Delta by Bucky Burris, or true life accounts like At the Hurricane's Eye by Greg Walker and Crippled Eagle by Rod Lenahan. Suffice to say that The Terrible Game led me on my own journey, not to some exotic locale to fight our country's enemy of the week, but one that led me to a fascinating family whose service to our nation stretches back almost 100 years. As I wrapped up my conversation with Dan Tyler III, I encouraged him to write a new preface to The Terrible Game and consider re-releasing it.
It's amazing to hear how 3 generations have contributed to the betterment of our nation. The Terrible Game sounds really interesting, and if you're interested in getting your own copy of the book, which originally sold for 35 cents, it's going to cost you about $125 now for the paperback on Amazon. This episode was written and produced by Jack Murphy and Rod Rodriguez. Additional editing and sound design by Clear Commo Studios. Executive produced by Joe Fleming. Huge thanks to our guest, Dan Tyler. We'll have a link to Jack's story, Special Ops Has a Broken Culture with Explosive Breaching That Can Lead to TBIs, in the show notes. Make a plan to do away with high-interest credit card debt by transferring your balance to a Navy Federal Credit Union credit card. With a low intro APR and no balance transfer fees, you can pick the right card to help you take back control. Visit NavyFederal.org. Navy Federal Credit Union. Our members are the mission. Leave us a review and a 5-star rating on whatever podcast player you use. Those reviews really do help us reach new audiences. And be sure to share this podcast. We grow through word of mouth, so please share. You can find Military Matters everywhere you listen to podcasts, or go to stripes.com and click on the podcast tab. We're always free to listen to. Use promo code PODCAST and save 50% on your digital subscription to Stars and Stripes. Follow us on Twitter. Jack Murphy is at Jack Murphy RGR, and you can find me at RodPodRod. I'm Rod Rodriguez.
I'm Jack Murphy.
We'll see you at the next episode.